Hello, everybody. Back to week 2. 8-week classes go quick, so we've got a lot to cover this week, kind of looking in depth at HTML, and we'll get started with CSS and styling things up, adding some colors and layouts, making the pages look a little bit better. So Skip might be joining us. There was an issue with the links last week. That's what has happened. But he sent me an email this morning, said he might not be able to make it. He has some other stuff going on, so we'll see here in a few minutes if he comes in. And if not, he made a video for all the classes. It's on Ivy Learn under the section under modules and resources. There's a section about videos. He did a little introduction video for all the different programs under him, which I guess covers the physical introduction whenever you can't make it if things show up. So last week, we went over course policies and did a quick overview of a web page, put a few words on the screen, basically. Not a whole lot, kind of preview mode. So we're going to go over it in a little more depth this week, kind of get started putting websites together and what's going on with it. So we basically look, the idea is it's called a markup language, HTML hypertext markup language. So whenever we have some words that we want to show on the screen, I'll just write some random words here, a bunch of words. We need a way for the computer to identify how we want those words to show, what it is. My first exposure to markup languages was back in the 1980s. Oh, there's somebody. Back in the 1980s, there was this time period when printers could do way more than the screens could. So if we wanted to make words bold and or make words italic, there was no way to show italic things on the screen. Y'all have probably seen them in history books, so black screens with green pixels that lit up. It was pixel by pixel, and like if we wanted to write an A, there was only one way to write an A there, just by turning on a certain number of pixels so that it looked like an A. And we couldn't make it bold or italic or anything on the screen, but the printers could do a whole lot more. So to identify that, we would need some symbol to identify what type of thing we have. And for those that are going to be doing a lot of programming, the angle brackets are the standard notation to identify a type of thing. But for us in HTML, all our types are pretty much going to be text or images. We'll see both of them today. And it just gives us an identification thing. It says these words are this type of thing with a start and a stop point. So our basic ones, like a paragraph, we just use P for that. And paragraphs, the words go together, just the basic font for the browser, a line break at the end. And we always have opening and closing tags. And they'll look the same, but the closing tag will have a /. So it also marks the start and end point, which makes it very, very efficient for the computer because it doesn't have to have a whole lot the CPU doesn't need a lot of extra stuff running to try to figure out where data starts and stops. Each piece of data includes its start and end point. So markup languages in general are also used a lot to buy back efficiencies that we lose with things that are better for the program. That's why pretty much everybody has to take this class, even if you're not doing web stuff, just to learn about markup languages in general, because they're better for the computer. And likewise with web stuff for transmission, because when we split it up and transmit it across the network and then rebuild it on the other side, it's clearly marked where everything starts, the start and stop point on each piece of data that we include. So back in the 90s, early 90s, markup languages were still prevalent. They're very good for computers. So that's when we started transmitting with them. I'm going to go ahead and erase this. That was just a quick example. just a bunch of words, kind of what we saw last week. And we surround our data with these tags, and then the whole thing together is called an element. So this will be referred to as a paragraph element. Just a little bit of terminology there. So there were a number of tags to identify the type of text we were sending, whether it's regular text, bold, italic, a header section, or a header line, or splitting things up into sections, and or divisions of a page. So for a long time, from when it was first created up until that was the big change in HTML5, was whenever we split up a page. So, y'all have seen web pages before. We have this document we're going to show on the screen, but we don't want it to look like a text file where the words just go from top to bottom, left to right, fill up the whole thing with no layout or anything. So we often want to split up the page into different sections. Have like a header section, maybe a couple columns, a footer at the bottom, and divide everything up into sections. And for a long time, the only element we had to divide these up was a div tag, short for division. And we'd have the opening div tag, and then the closing div tag, a couple lines down, put a bunch of stuff in between them, and then adjust those sections of the page around to get a nice looking layout and stuff. But there's only the same type of tag, so it would look a little confusing, especially if there was a bunch nested in there, and we'd get to the end and there'd be like 5 or 6 div tags that needed closed. It might be a little hard to keep track of what was going on. So what they came up with for HTML5 is what's called semantic tags. Which are really just mostly div tags with better names, more useful names. So instead of a div up here for the header, we have a tag called header to indicate that's a division of the page where a header would normally go. A very common one is a nav tag for navigation, typically where all the links, y'all have seen those on a web page up at the top, a bunch of tabs that go to all the pages across the site, something to organize that, and we can tell at a glance what it is because of a useful name. So that's what's meant by semantic tags. There's quite a few. We're getting ready to look at a long list of them. A section tag, a footer at the bottom, a whole bunch of different things that are useful names. And those aren't restrictions. We could call this thing at the top the footer, call this one down here the nav, one of our columns, we could call it a header. But all that's going to do is make it confusing for you. Since you're writing the code, these semantic tags are something that should be useful for you. And a bunch of useful names. So that was the big change with one of the big changes with HTML 5.0. So in this class, please use the semantic tags. Try not to use more than one div tag at a time. That is just another option. You can just think of it as a division of the page, a section. And some of the things in the textbook, or in the 10th edition of the textbook, so it's been around a lot longer than HTML 5.0. They just updated it when all this stuff was created. So some of the things in the textbook might show a whole bunch of div tags or other things that aren't that probably should have been updated at some point, but didn't get that way. So yeah, just in general, try not to use more than one of the same type of tag in each one to get used to them. And I was going to pull up the list. This seems like a good place to introduce what will be the primary reference for anything web, all the web stuff, the official standards and all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up this web page to refer you to. get this out of the way. And like always, I'm sure most people are familiar with it. The internet's going to run really slow while the Zoom call is going. But hopefully it won't take too long. So the standards, right? Mentioned HTML5. That is the official international standard. We're up to the 5th major revision on it. Actually, we're on 5.1 right now. So we're on the first small revision of the 5th major revision of the standards. And those standards are set by this group called the W3 Consortium, World Wide Web Consortium. And they have an official page where they for reference material for all this stuff. It's w3schools.com. I'm just going to put W3 Schools in the search bar. We usually search for stuff anymore, right? Very rarely do we put the actual address in. But this site right here, www.w3schools.com, this will be your primary reference for anything to do with the web, because this is the official standards. So HTML, that's what we're looking at here. And CSS, those are the two we'll be looking at in this class over the next 8 weeks. Along the standard client-side scripting language is JavaScript. That's the dynamic things that run on the client. But if we had unlimited access to do dynamic things there, that would be a major security risk, right? So it's very restricted what we can do when we transmit executable code across the network. So along with that, we have server-side scripting. PHP is probably the most popular. You can also use Python. A lot of people like Python. PHP tends to be used a little bit more often for the client-side scripting and connecting to databases, so SQL stuff. So all the kind of standards are consolidated here, and this is the group that sets the standard. So up here at the top, HTML reference or CSS reference, if you just go to this page, and we'll just go into the HTML reference. One thing, I'll go ahead and point it out now. You'll notice here on this, on my screen, if you look at the address bar, the first example we saw last week, we named our file .html, right? That's how we know it's an HTML file. And this is the organization that sets the standard, but they don't use the standard they set. They use .asp pages, which is this whole site was written in C#, not in the standard that it's about, which strikes a lot of people as really, really strange. But there's reasons why they did that. We'll look at some of them here in just a moment. But if you just click on the reference page, you'll see this long list of tags here. The doc type, we'll talk about that in a moment. A tag, we saw that in our first example last week with the anchor tag for references. And everything's abbreviations, addresses, area, article. A lot of those are semantic tags. Like, we could use them for different things and restyle them any way we want. But the point of having a good name there is so that it makes your HTML code cleaner, easier to read, easier to follow. You don't get lost in a code and a lot of text. Like B for bold tag. You see there's quite a few there. You'll want to go over here, scroll through it, and just over the semester, you'll pick up more and more. Get used to using different ones more and more. I'll click on one of these, the paragraph tag. That's our basic text. Includes a line break and shows the default font for whatever default font is set for the browser. And the reason they use the ASP page written in C# is because of this button right here. So everything on this, every time you look something up on W3 Schools, you'll see these buttons say, try it yourself. and there's a little editor on here where you can adjust things and see the changes in live time. It's really, really useful for putting like small bits together, right? If you have a big complicated page you're working on and need to work on just a small thing, it's good to have work on just that small thing separately, make sure it works, and then stick it in the big page. Or while you're learning, you can see the different things. So if I added a couple tags in here, so like in this first paragraph, you see the HTML's over on the left. So if I maybe added a small tag here, and then over here, close the small tag. And when I hit run, the little output over here will update and show what it is. And notice how I put that together. So there's a paragraph tag. So the start of the paragraph tag, and then for nesting it, the small tag started. And when we get to the end, the small tag is the first one to close. So you want to be careful when nesting things like that to make sure like it's fully inside of the outer one. So like the small text is completely inside of the paragraph tag. Or I added like a bold one, a B for bold. And come over here and in the bold tag. And just make sure when you're nesting things, they're completely inside. But along with being the primary reference, there's also this little editor preview thing so you can check this stuff along the way and see what it looks like. There's some other reference material we'll look at along the way, some really good ones in a couple weeks. There's one for some CSS. This is from the actual people that set the standards. So there's some other references, especially for CSS, that are put together by like artists that use it every day that can be kind of better reference material, but this is the official place to look, w3schools.com. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to introduce that one. And yeah, you might want to go there and scroll through that list of the semantic tags and see what names there are to work with. But it is a long list, so it's going to be kind of overwhelming. So, you know, maybe stretch that out, or as you work through the book, pick up a couple at a time and then go to that site and expand it from there. So I guess we'll do another example, kind of work through examples. That's what I tend to do in a lot of these programming classes. This is a very active subject we learn by doing. So that's kind of the class plan I have mostly, is working the lecture in the material into examples and cover it there. So was everybody able to get a text editor installed? Something to edit with? Yeah, and when we do the class examples, I'm sorry, what, Chelsea?
I got Carrot. Is that a good one? Because
Yes.
I have a Chromebook. Okay.
Yes, I've heard very good things about Carrot. There's lots and lots of choices, and I would also recommend trying different ones, seeing which ones you like. But yeah, Carrot usually seems to be at the top of the list for Chromebook users. And there's no shortage of it. You just want to make sure when you're writing code and doing any sort of programming that you have a basic text editor, the one that's just Unicode, straight Unicode stuff. You don't need any fancy document editors like Word or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and open Notepad++. I'll probably use some different ones throughout the semester in class. The reason I use Notepad++ is because it has a zoom thing, so I can zoom in and make it a little bit easier to see, hopefully. So the first line and everything we write is we have to document doc type declaration. And that always looks, well, it's going to be a standalone tag. So it's one of the few ones we don't need a closing tag for. Oh, somebody just came in. I'm going to admit her real quick. Sorry, I always stop the screen share because last summer I had like I'd be sharing the screen and go to let people in. And then I found out later, all it would do was not stop showing me the button and not actually let them in the Zoom meeting. Like, that's a really weird feature. Why even show it? Okay, so our first line is always saying what type of document we have. Oh, something in the chat room. Oh, it's all right. Yeah, connection issues happen, especially when weather gets bad like this. So that was a tag, and it starts with an exclamation mark. That it conveys meaning there. It's been around for a while, and that does include meaning with it. That's why we have to put the exclamation mark. But some of that's a little beyond the scope of this course. So for this point, just think the exclamation mark tells it is specifically a type of document. This is telling the computer what it is reassembling after it gets transmitted across the network. Remember last week we talked about TCP and IP, and we take the file and we break it down into pieces, send those pieces independently across the network, and they get reassembled on the other side. So exclamation mark says what it is, and then the word doc type just kind of goes along right along with it. It's like, what type of document is it? And right now everything's HTML 5.0 or 5.1. So for that, we just put HTML. And well, along with that, right now everything is or should be HTML 5.0 or 5.1. So technically, we could get away without putting that line in there for now. But whenever the standard updates in the future, which they're constantly updating standards, making improvements, and after so many improvements come along, then they're going to give it a new number. Whenever it updates in the future, if you leave this off, you would have to come back and put it into everything you left it off of. So it's a whole lot easier just to put it in now. Something showed up in the chat room, and the pictures moved to go in front of it. There it is. Yeah. So for good measure, go ahead and put that in, because like when we switch from HTML4 to HTML5, the switch stretches out over 3 or 4 years, because it's kind of a headache to go back and put code into every file that it was left out of. So it's a lot easier just to put it in the first time. And then once we have the doc type declaration saying what type of thing it is, then we're ready to start transmitting code. And we can begin putting our tags in. So our first tag, the main one, is the HTML tag. And this is like the start and end things. So these 2 lines that are typed here is saying, well, we have a HTML 5.0 document. And then this tag simply says the HTML starts right here. So I'm going to come down a couple lines and go ahead and put the closing HTML tag, which the name will look the same. And we just put a little slash to indicate that it's the end of it. And and everything in between that is going to be the HTML code. That's how we get the information to the computer. And along with this, there's 2 sections that every HTML page will need. A head section and a body section. And the head is like internal information. There's really the only thing that we can see from the head is like the label that goes in the tab and the fave icon. We'll see that in a couple weeks. The little icon for the site. Those are the only things that go in the head. Mostly it's information, like what language is the page written in? What's the default screen size? Should it start off zoomed in or zoomed out or something? For different machines too, right? What's the default size for a desktop versus what's the default size for a tablet, information about the page and things like that. Things for the search engine, we'll see that near the end of the semester. Little data that the search engine bots will use to help identify pages. That sort of stuff goes in the head. And the body is what we see. Anything that goes inside between the opening and closing body tag, that is what we see on the screen. That's what we think of as the web page. And so every page will have this stuff right here. So probably not a bad idea to go ahead and save this as a starting point. That way we don't have to type it every time, right? We can just go ahead and save this and then jump as a starter. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And hit save and navigate someplace to save it. I'll put it in here. And maybe just something like starter and .html. And I usually type .html. If you wanted to, you could also select it from this list. But in most text editors, that's going to be a very, very long list because the good text editors know about lots of different types of files. So you can just type starter.html to turn it into an HTML page. And at that point, things should change colors. Right now, there's not a lot of color changing. The tags turned blue. Also notice when I click on one of them, it marked that beginning of the opening tag and the end of the closing tag a different color, highlighted them to show what it is. So that's referred to as lexing, changing the color for the language. It's very useful. It makes it a little easier to tell what's what, if there's typos or anything. Because if things should change colors and don't, it's a good indication there's a typo in there somewhere. To start with, I'm going to come in down here in the body tag and just put some words on here. So I'm going to save that as a starter file to avoid typing that same stuff every time. So first thing I'm going to do now is save as and make a file of the actual example for today. I'll call it class 2. That'll work. It's just a random name. But and that way that starter file's there. That way I don't have to type the doc type declaration and the open HTML and head and body tags. And before long, we'll see other stuff that's going to basically be in every single page. It's not required like those things, but it's essentially going to be there. So you could add that as a starter file and then save a little bit of time and avoid typos, because once you type it once with no typos and just start there every time, you don't have to worry about that, because humans are very prone to making typos. So it's often a good idea to let the computer type as much as possible. So another thing on these text editors, y'all probably have the little predictive text pop up. I have it turned off. Where do I turn it back on at? I think settings. I can't remember where the button is. Somewhere in that menu, I can turn it back on. I turned it off because I thought it might get in the way for examples. But on yours, you should see little, whenever you start typing, you'll see the little predictive text, and usually you can just hit tab or enter or something and use that. And computers never make a typo. So it's good to let the computer type as much as possible. I just turned it off because that box will get in the way while we're doing stuff. So I'm going to start by just putting some words here. Here are some random words. And kind of like we saw earlier, in just the basic one is a paragraph tag. So just angle brackets with a P to start it. And then the same thing to close it, but just a slash in there. And it's completely nested inside the body. So at this point, we have some words that will show on the page. So to go ahead and open this. If I saved it where I thought I did, I think I saved it here. Yep, there it is. So you can, as long as you saved it as an HTML file, you should see the browser icon marking the file. And you can double click on it or right click and go to open with. And then choose one of the browsers to open it with. I'm just going to use Chrome for the class for the most part. But you will want to check your things in different browsers because it might look slightly different. When we wrote the code there, we said that's a paragraph. And then Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox or Safari or Opera or Edge, whichever browser you're using, it's what determines what a paragraph looks like if we don't add other style information. So things might look slightly different. For the most part, they're going to be very close. There's only one thing we'll see this semester that Edge won't do. All the other browsers will do it, but Edge is still slacking it off. So that's summary detail tags. The stuff that collapses, we have like a little triangle. And when we click on the triangle, the paragraph opens up or closes, hides. Edge won't do those for some reason, but all the other browsers do. So make sure whenever you put a page together that you check it in different browsers to see what it looks like. And I'm just going to split this up so I can see both of them. There's not going to be a lot on this page, so it might be useful to see both things. I'll put that over at the right, and then put the code over on the left. Okay, that way we can kind of see both things. And the words are on there, but it doesn't look very good, right? It's just a basic black text on a white background. You might want to make that look a little bit better. So we'll start talking about that here in just a second. Did everybody following along kind of get some words showing up like that?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. It seemed like a good time to check and make sure, see if anybody had encountered problems. It's very straightforward, and that's the basic style. We'll just do lots and lots of this, slight changes on it. So just to have some more stuff, I'm going to put a couple things on here. I'm going to put like a level 1 header. I'll just write class example or something. That way we have more than one tag because we'll need them in a few moments. And maybe one more paragraph of random words. More words down here. I like to try to keep examples in class very simple. That's why it's just completely random words and kind of talk mostly about the tags because the words are what changes, and then where we put the tags, that's kind of what we're studying in this class. So after hitting save, should be able to reload the page and see that other stuff. So it knows what the header tag is. That's a level 1 header. That's the biggest headers, but we have 6 of them. So we can H1, 2, H2, H3, H4, all the way down to H6, and they get smaller and smaller and less bold as it goes down. Which is something we'll see before too long, but I might as well go ahead and mention that now. People that are new to computer programming might not realize it, but there's actually, bold is not just one single thing. Most people are used to Microsoft Word, where we just have that one button to bold text or unbold it. But there's a wide range of making things bold, which often confuses people. That's why things like Microsoft Word or Google Docs just has the one button that's, either turn it bold or not bold. But we have a huge range of things. So when we're writing code and getting into styling things programmatically, you will want to be aware of that. There's a huge range of bold, it's not just on, off on bold.
Hey, Chris, this is Tiv. I want to see if I can pick your brain from back when you were an IT student in our position. How long do you think it took you to really get a grasp on like just simple things like that? I'm sure you just know, but how long do you think it takes to really get a grasp on just the basics?
That's kind of hard to say because that's going to be different for everybody. And as for me, I've watched computers grow into this. Like I first learned about programming, or spreadsheets are good examples. When I first learned spreadsheets, the computer I learned them on didn't even go all the way through the alphabet with the columns. So they were much, much smaller, and I've watched them grow into what they are. So my personal experience is probably a little bit different because it was
Oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot
much
of sense.
smaller. Yeah. So yeah, like I've watched, like spreadsheets, the columns didn't even go all the way through the alphabet because the computers couldn't handle it back then. And there were a lot less functions. So all those, when you sit down and learn Excel, all that massive list of functions, I learned those as they showed up instead of having that big list to begin with.
You're an OG.
But, yeah, it varies, and it's a complicated subject. So some stuff some stuff still have to look up. There's still a lot of stuff I will look up and learn along the way and continue to expand it. And it's a dynamic field. It changes. Improvements are made. So then what you learn, you have to come back and work around it again. But if you just stick with it, the basic ideas should start coming together before too long. And at some point, Tiv, another thing about these examples is I prepare for the lectures. I get ready and I practice this stuff beforehand. So sometimes in the lecture, it might make it look extra easy. So at least once in every class, I make it a point to do a lecture that is not prepared, so that you can see that it is still like what y'all do, where it's full of typos and things might get put in the wrong order, just coming off the top of the head. But I don't want to do that every class because that would just waste our time, right?
Joining you on Sunday for that chat room really helped me understand a lot. So I'll probably be jumping in those because I understand what you're doing here. But it took me to go separately and say help me. Okay, I'm sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, it just it takes a minute to get it. It's not straightforward because we don't think the same way a computer processes. So and computers can't adjust themselves, right? That's a machine. It only works one way. So we're the ones that have to make the adjustments, and it does take a little bit of time. But yeah, we're only 1 week into it now, so it'll come together quickly. Were there any other questions?
Oh no, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So like I was saying, I'm talking and typing at the same time, and I do practice all this beforehand. So it might look extra easy when I'm doing it. Without the practice, I'm, stuff's normally full of typos and things like that. And sometimes things, when it's just flowing off the top of our head, it gets out of order. So at least once every class, I do try to make it a point to do an unprepared lecture, so y'all can see that the difference, the way it actually naturally flows out, doesn't always line up as nicely as it does in the practice ones.
I did my code, just having the capital P. Remember, it messed up my code. Just having it as a capital P and not a lowercase. So remember that it is case sensitive.
Yes, you'll want to watch that case sensitive. And on along the lines of case sensitive, one thing y'all are going to want to watch for is the other day when we were talking, I think most people were on a PC, a couple people are on a Chromebook, but Chromebooks and PC and Windows, those are not case sensitive for like file names and stuff. So, but we're loading that onto an Apache server, whereas an Apache server is case sensitive. So something you'll want to watch for, and almost everybody sees it, show up fairly quickly is if it works on your computer, but does not work when it gets to the server, there's probably a capital letter that got off somewhere, because it's not, PCs and Chromebooks are not case sensitive, but the Apache server will be. So your Windows machine might be able to find it, but the server won't be able to find the file. That's something that shows up a lot. Okay, so getting back in here, this is just some basic words on there. It's identified, and notice there's some styling information with this, right? We didn't put any line breaks here. The browser, when it reads through and interprets that HTML code we're sending it, it knows that a header should be on a line by itself, this level 1 header, and also knows the paragraph has some has line breaks on it. So there's some styling information in those tags, not a lot. And one thing I want to point out here, if you push F12 in your browser, so just the F12 button, function button, you'll get this little inspector panel. In most browsers, you can also right click and go to inspect to open it. And this has all sorts of debugging tools, the console to see errors, and ways to pull up the file itself. A very useful one is under elements. You see it looks like the HTML code. We can expand and collapse stuff. And notice when I hover over things, it kind of highlights it. So like hovering over the header here, it puts in blue the actual H1 header, and then there's a margin around headers too. That's another thing, just some of the built-in styling. And down here at the bottom, you'll see, there's some styling information that'll make more sense before long. So whenever things don't look right, make sure you open that and kind of hover over the different sections and elements. Check what the style information that you have about it is. And those are just some tools to help you find problems when they show up. Let's move that out of the way. There we go. And well, we got those words showing on the page, but kind of boring, right? The blue background or white background, black letters, not really anything going on. So we're about ready to start styling things. So as we get into that, I want to talk about something called attributes. I'm going to go back to the board for a minute and make some notes here. Well, this has been up here for a minute. Everybody okay if I erase this? I don't hear anything, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this. I always try to check before I erase stuff off the board. Make sure everybody's just caught up on notes and stuff. So we're talking about tags here. And we have the angle brackets where we define things, and somewhere down below there'll be the closing tag. But in the opening tags, some of our tags, we might want to pass some information about it, right? So like in a paragraph tag, we could put some background information here. Yeah, I'll start with this one because it's something to not do. So for a long time, up until HTML 5.0, we would put styling information right into the tag. Those are called attributes. It's things about this paragraph element. So I'm going to put one here. So like BG color for background color, and it's space delimited. So we have the name of the tag, then a space, and then the attributes, the thing we're filling in, what we're telling the computer about. This was the first example to spring to my mind because we're getting ready to talk about styling and stuff. And for a long time, we had to send that information in with the tag before cascading style sheets, before CSS. So we would just put that attribute in. It's something about this paragraph. So once we'd say that, from that opening paragraph tag down to the closing paragraph tag, everything would be whatever color we put here, maybe blue. And it's something about it. But that's what's called attributes. And it's information about this element. Remember, from the opening to the closing tag, we call that an element. So the background colors, or the font size, and all the styling information, we used to have to do it that way. But with cascading style sheets becoming the standard, we no longer do it this way. It won't, if you run it through the validation sites, when it checks it, make sure all the code looks good, it will count wrong on that. So that was just the first example that popped in my mind of an attribute. So we have the name of our tag, a space, and then the name of the attribute equals whatever value we want to put in that attribute. We'll see it in practice here in just a moment. We don't really style them much anymore. So that one's not. If we're going to do styling there, we do have a style attribute. We actually put in an attribute called style equals, or assignment. We're going to assign the style, and then we put CSS code inside of quotation marks for the value to pass in for that. We'll see that in practice here in just a moment. But for the most part, it's informational and action type of attributes that we use anymore. So we don't use those direct styling attributes. And if we are going to use a styling attribute, we want to use the style sheet attribute. But actions being things that would happen. So like on click. So whenever somebody clicks on that paragraph, we can say what's going to happen and call up some piece of code that's going to happen. So it's mostly action type stuff anymore. Did somebody log in? Oh, it's not. It made the somebody's hearing noise, but I don't see anybody there. But those are what's called attributes. So we can often use those. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. Oh, must have just kind of signed out. Oh, sorry. And I'll put a note here. So the form for that, it's space delimited. So the name of the tag, then we put a space. And then our attribute equals some value, and the value always gets passed in as a string. So the value will be in quotation marks. So let's see a couple of these in practice. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. So like that one I just mentioned. So maybe this first paragraph here, I want a different background color. So I'm going to erase this here in just a second. So this is the one that please not do. It just seemed like a good, at this point, there's not a lot of attributes we can introduce. So we'll see more before long, but we have like this attribute background color. Whoops, BG color for background color. And that's going to be assigned some value passed in as a string. So like the color blue. Oh, it doesn't even work anymore in this browser. So that's, so you don't want to do that. In some browsers, it will still show that. Will only BG. Nope. So some browsers won't even show it anymore. So if you do like the attributes like that, I will count it off in the homework. I just wanted to mention it. Mostly it's like doing stuff. So like on click or when we load the page, and different events that could happen, but that's still a little ahead of us. I just wanted to mention that, and there's not a lot we can talk about at this point. we'll see the style attribute before long. We'll see how to change the color that way. But for a long time, we had to do it this way. And also wanted to mention this because in some reference material, you'll still see that. Because that's what it was for 25 years. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of examples that did it that way are still out there on the internet. And one quick note about attributes here is we could put a space here. The space won't really matter at this point. We do have to have a space before it to separate it from the name of the tag. And a space here is optional. A lot of people kind of prefer it without the space inside of that attribute assignment because it might, if things kind of blend together if we have lots of attributes, which we will see here in just a few minutes when we start talking about CSS, which will be kind of right after the break. Oh, actually, it's the next page of notes. It's 151, so I guess start talking about that right now. But that's, I just kind of wanted to introduce that and point out that you will sometimes see style information as you look at different examples. Maybe some older examples might still have those set up that way. So you don't want to do it that way. So that's another thing. It's very common in computer fields to find examples online, but be careful and make sure that the example you're looking at is still relevant. And, you probably don't want to use an example from 15 years ago because things might have changed quite a bit since then. So always make sure if you look up examples and stuff, make sure that you make sure you check the date and make sure it's relevant. So an attribute we will use a lot is like an informational thing, ways to identify this. When we go to start putting styles on there, we'll want ways to identify it. So aside from just a paragraph tag, we need some sort of a way for the computer to recognize these paragraphs as different, right? Maybe we want one of those paragraphs to be blue and the other one to be green, and we'll need some sort of identification. So that's something we'll use a lot. And the primary one we'll use for this class is just the word class. So like, what class of paragraph is it? A category of paragraphs. So I'm just going to make up one. So maybe that's the first paragraph. And then this one is the second type. Just some sort of name. We will see this stuff in much more detail when we're ready to talk about it. I just wanted to go ahead and introduce attributes and kind of go over all the terminology and stuff. You'll see that what I did here didn't really make any change on the page because it's all informational. It doesn't change anything about what we're seeing. If we come in here and open the Inspect tab, which my pictures are in the way, I'm going to move those over. If I click on that, you'll see some different, down here, there's the information about paragraphs, how it displays, the blocks of the left and right side of it, and all kinds of information and things like right here. You'll see that there's identification on it now. So when I hover over this paragraph, over there at the left of the screen, you'll see it, instead of just saying P, that it's a paragraph, like here it just says H1, gives the size, but here it says P dot first, like what type of paragraph. That way we can, and this one's P dot second.
Okay.
So it's ways to distinguish them. Yes.
So Chris, once you actually define what first and second are in the document, then it'll make differences, right? Because you'll define what first means and what second means, or whatever you call the class.
Yeah, so what we're going to do with these is we will style them different. So we're going to define what a first paragraph should look like. Maybe it has a blue background and white font. And the second one, maybe our second type, we'll define that to have a green background and yellow font or something.
Is this the kind of stuff that we would actually define in the head section?
No, this
Where do we find our style sheet, maybe, or where do we define
in the style sheet? So if we put the style sheet in the head section, which that's one of the first things we're going to talk about after break, is where to put those style sheets. That's why I want to go ahead and put this attribute in here so we have them. But it's if we put the style sheet in the head section, then we would refer to it that way. This is just an identifier. This would be the definition. And then whenever we do our style sheet, we refer to that thing we defined that way. I have other notes about these. And so for the most part, we're going to use class as the identifier, but that's not the only type of identifier we have. I'm going to write a couple things on the board. I'm going to go ahead and erase this example, just kind of talking about attributes. Remember, it's always whatever attribute it is going to be assigned a value passed in quotation marks. And it goes in the opening tag. We do not have to put it in the closing tag. The closing that attribute is automatic when we close the tag. You can think of it that way. So identifiers. Identifier attributes. So for the most part in this class, these are the attributes we're going to see, the ones to identify it. So our first one, what we just saw, is class. And typically you think of that as group similar things. So I use the words first and second there because that was just off the top of my head, really. But we could call one of them blue and then put all our, everything on the page that's going to be the shade of blue we like will be that one. Call the other one red and some sort of descriptive name for what they are. But just a way to identify the things we want styled a certain way. Tags can have multiple classes. So there, what I showed on that example a moment ago, there was only one class there, but we can put lots of classes there so that we can identify that tag as getting styled in more than one way. We'll see that in an example before too long. The other two big ones we have, we can also give things a name. This is semi-unique. And by semi-unique, I mean different tags can have the same name, but each tag only gets one name. Each tag gets one name. Whoops, that's not its own name. Each tag has its own name, but tags can share names. So maybe if we're putting together a form, we'll see forms here in a couple of weeks, and a spot for somebody to enter their address, we could call everything in that section address. So like 5 different input boxes, one for the name, the street, the number, the zip code, and the city. All of those would have the name address, but each one only gets one name by itself. We can't give it a second name after that. That's why we allow the example, because that really wouldn't be that useful for identifying those things. But we can, different elements can have the same name, but each element only gets one name. The other one, kind of in a room there, is going to be an ID. And this is the unique one. Ideally, things should not share the same name. Elements each get a unique ID. And I say should not because it should be unique. Like no 2 IDs should be the same. That's kind of what ID means, right? But we can take advantage of certain things. Like there's, for a given ID, there should only be one of them, but a computer doesn't know how to count to 1. So sometimes we can use that and take advantage, speed things up by tricking the computer into thinking several different things are the same thing. Although that's kind of bad form, so I should just stick with this. But it should be unique. And that's our 3 identifier ones. And for the most part, a general rule of thumb, I'll change colors. I don't know if the color will show up. Classes are used with the style sheet. Name are used by the server-side scripting. And IDs are used by client-side scripting. That's not a hard, fast rule. We will use every single one of them in style sheets this time. So it's not restrictive, but that's just the general rule of thumb. When you're putting an identifier on to work with server-side scripting, your first thought should be name. When you're putting an identifier on to work with a style sheet, your first thought should be a class. And for an identifier for server-side scripts or JavaScript, your first thought should be ID, but we can mix and match them. If there's a way to identify it, we can identify it from everywhere. So that's just a quick rule of thumb, not any sort of restriction. So for the most part, we'll see style sheets or classes because we're going to be working with style sheets this semester. But we will use names and IDs quite often in our style sheet. And there's other ways that we can identify things. We can identify things by their attributes, right? The attributes like I was just talking about, we can use that to select things when we put together a style sheet. We'll see that in a couple weeks. We'll have the value of the attributes and all sorts of stuff. Let's see, do I have any room left on the board? Yeah, so these are basically, I guess I've got a little bit of room here. It looks something like this. It's an attribute, so we'll just have we'll say it's a class equals some name as a string, so like my stuff. And when you put together a class name, you can't put any spaces in there because we separate, if we have more than one, we separate them by spaces. So no spaces in the names. And for a name attribute, we just put the attribute name equals this name, I don't know. making something up here. The main thing I want to point out is the attribute is assigned some value in quotation marks. And again, no spaces in there. Same thing with ID. ID equals new ID 3 or something. And the attribute is assigned a string, something in quotation marks. And I mentioned briefly, we can have more than one class. And if we have more than one, just space to limit them. So like class equals blue stuff, and then a space, and red stuff, and green stuff, and just separate them by spaces. All inside of those quotation marks. And that way we can apply more than one set of style rules to a particular element based off that identifier. That's why classes show up most often with CSS, because we can organize things a lot better that way. We'll come back to that here in a few minutes. Yeah, so one other thing I want to talk about before we take a break, and then we'll jump into style sheets and start making that page in the example look a little bit better. Is it okay if I erase all this? Everybody taking notes, get that wrote down, or?
Yes.
Okay, or remember where it's at in the video. I guess that's even easier these days, right? Just make a note that it's like an hour into the video or something. Quicker than writing. But again, it's an active subject, so we will see that in practice very soon, and it will probably make a lot more sense when we're doing stuff with it than just me standing up here talking about it. We're actually using it to identify stuff. First off, I want to have another note to mention about elements and tags. Tags and elements. It's kind of a way to think about it. And I like to say, think of it like a container. Like a container for our data. Like Tupperware containers, right? We have all those different sizes, and when we finish eating a big meal and go to put the leftovers away, we choose the container it's going to go in based on best fit. And that's kind of how we'll use our tags. We'll choose which one goes there because it's the tag that fits our data the best, makes our code the easiest to follow. And so what can these containers hold? So these containers can hold one, information for the computer. I'll put background information for computer. Oh, for computer. With a foreground being what the user sees, right? What shows on the screen. The background information for the computer. We can put that in tags. And I wrote info or information. Does everybody know the difference between information and data? Has anybody heard that described before? Information is useful. Data is just like data would just be like a set of raw numbers. Say 62 inches. Right? That by itself, it's a raw number. It doesn't really mean anything. But if we said somebody is 62 inches high, then it has information, right? Or somebody told you my height is, they were 62 inches tall, then it has meaning. It becomes useful. So information, that's useful data. That's the first time it's shown up here, I think. So I wanted to make sure and specify the difference because you will hear those terms used separately. So here, when I say background information for the computer, that means the computer is going to know what to do with it. It's not arbitrary data that doesn't, not arbitrary data passing through. Something the computer will know what to do with it. So it can hold that. Another example of that would be the things for search engines to find. Right? A search engine is not going to, it's going to send out bots to check websites, but it's not going to sit there and read all the paragraphs on the site. It's going to look at that background information to see what the site's about and see if it's relevant to the search that it's checking. Something we've already seen is these containers can hold other containers. Back to like the little food, leftover food containers. I would say Tupperware. We don't, it's not really Tupperware much anymore. But the leftover containers, we can put different, we can put them inside of each other, right? They're different sizes, so the small ones can fit in the big ones. And then what we put in them, we put different things in each one, depending on what fits best. The third thing, words and symbols, words, digits, symbols, written language. That's mostly what we're doing with websites, right? We're transmitting written language to convey information to somebody else. So this is data. It doesn't become information until it transmits across the internet, somebody reads it and makes sense out of it. So the raw data. And then whenever somebody reads that data, makes sense out of it and uses it, then we would call it information. And for graphics. Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a note here. Those things are arbitrary data. They won't become information until a human sees them on the web page and figures out what to do with it. Which, it's on the list, so we might as well throw an image into that example, right? So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. And an image tag is slightly different than our other ones because, well, on our other stuff, we have this. We say the paragraph starts here, we throw our words in there, and then it's kind of off the screen, but the paragraph ends over there. But an image tag is a, whoops, push the wrong button there, end of the line. Oh, is everybody familiar with the buttons like home and end on your keyboard? Those make a big difference when you're typing things. The home button will go to the beginning of the line, and the end button will go to the end of the line. So if I just click here, put the cursor at the beginning of the line here, and I'm on a laptop, so I have to hit function, and then the end key is on the arrow. But somewhere on your keyboard, there's a button for end. They'll just go to the end of the line, or the home goes to the beginning of the line. And if I notice that it didn't go to all the way to the left, it went to where the line was indented to. So if I push home again, then it goes to all the way over. And if I keep hitting the home button, it kind of toggles between them. So that can be really useful for selecting. Most people are used to using a mouse where you click and drag. It can be a whole lot quicker to use a keyboard. Right? The mouse only has a couple of buttons on it, whereas the keyboard has hundreds of buttons. So we can do a whole lot more things with the keyboard. So like if you need to select an entire line, what I usually do is use with those buttons I just mentioned, if we hit end to put the cursor at the end of the line, and then if you hold down shift and scroll, that's how we would select stuff before the mouse. So hold down shift and then push home. That's a really quick way to select a whole line. And holding shift and hitting home again, it can select that indent there at the beginning. So just a keyboard trick that'll be very useful this semester. Go to the end of the line, hold shift and home to go to the beginning of the line is a really quick way to select a line. A whole lot quicker than dragging your mouse around. So before we go take a break, I want to put one more thing on this page. So between these two paragraphs, I'm going to put an image here. And an image, well, we talked about the HTTP, the idea behind that, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, where the core idea is instead of sending the data, I'm just going to send you the address of that data, tell you where to find it. So our image tags, we do that way. I guess I better find some image real quick that we can refer to. I'm just going to draw a smiley face. I'm just going to open Microsoft Paint and put some sort of picture here. If you want to download a picture from the internet real quick while I'm doing this, following along, but I think I have Paint on here. I start typing. There it is. Yeah, I need some picture to put here. So I'm going to open Microsoft Paint and I'm going to pick a size and then just draw like a yellow circle. I'll just draw a quick smiley face. Draw a circle. I don't want an outline on that. No outline, and then with the brush, I'll do that. There we go. Just some picture to use. So when I save this, I'm going to go ahead and save it in the same spot that I saved that other stuff. I'll call it Smiley. Just to have a picture to put in there. Is this still open? Yeah, so here's where that HTML document is. And I just put that in the same folder to make it easier for now. We'll talk about all the directories and stuff before long. So an image, it's abbreviated, so it's just IMG for the tag. And then the one thing we have to have is we have to say where it's at. So we'll say it's a SRC for source. And the source of that is, notice it's an attribute again. So the name of the tag and then a space to separate the attribute. And then an equal sign for the assignment on that attribute. And then we'll just pass in the location of that image. Smiley.png. And then that already has all the information. So we don't necessarily need a closing tag, which makes it a standalone tag. So right here, like it is, would be fine. The last several times they've put together a standard for website stuff, they tried to include this, and in other markup languages, you have to put a slash at the end of a standalone tag. In HTML, you can kind of get away with it because due to backward compatibility, they weren't able to work that into the standard because there's a whole lot of old things that would quick work. And so what they did is the browser has to do it. So the people that make the browser has to put that. So if you don't put a slash here at the end of a standalone tag, the browser will. And I'm going to go ahead and ask that anytime you have a standalone tag, if it's just one tag, there's not an open and closed set, please put that slash for good practice. The last several times they set the standards, they tried to include it and dropped it at the last minute. So they want to put it there, and they're probably going to try again the next time they make a standard. But it's not required in HTML. The other markup languages it is. So for like XML or XAML or most of our other markup languages, that slash is definitely required. So I'm going to ask that in this class, please put a slash at the end of a standalone tag just for good practice. So now when I reload the page, it should show a picture. And that's the data we want to transmit. So we're going to look at a whole lot more about HTML and stuff, but that's the basic idea. That's everything. That's kind of the core idea of HTML right there. We put the tags to identify what type of data it is. And it's either going to be words or an image. And then, yeah, so that's our raw data. But it looks kind of boring on that page there, right? It's that was a lot of information. We're going to see this stuff repeatedly. Repetition is important in learning. So we'll see the same stuff over and over again. And there's still a whole lot of tags to look at, but that's the core information. So I think now we're probably ready to start adding some style to that, making it look a little bit better. So why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll do the style sheet after a break. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep.
Okay, 10 minutes sound good? Does that sound like enough?
Yep.
Okay, so let's take 10 and we'll come back at 2:32 and start looking at style, cascading style sheets. So I'm gonna stop the recording and I will see you all in just a moment.